I paid for 2 seats, and the man next to me said, "That doesn't mean you own the space." For a split second, I couldn't tell if the heat rushing to my face was anger or shame. The cabin air felt thin, recycled, pressing against my chest. The overhead light above our row flickered once, then steadied, sharp and unforgiving, as if it wanted witnesses. I was already seated when they boarded, my bag tucked under the empty seat beside me, the armrest lifted. I had chosen this flight carefully, paid extra carefully, counted the cost twice before clicking confirm. 2 seats, not because I couldn't fit in one, but because fitting wasn't the same as being allowed to exist without apologizing. I sat straight, hands folded in my lap, eyes forward, trying to make myself smaller, even though I had done everything right. The couple stopped at my row. I felt them before I heard them, a pause that lasted half a beat too long. The woman smiled tightly, the kind of smile that ends before it reaches the eyes. The man glanced at the empty seat, then at me, then back at the seat as if it had personally offended him. "Looks like someone got lucky," he said, already turning sideways to slide in. My shoulder brushed his arm. Not hard, just enough. I flinched anyway. "I'm sorry," I said automatically, even though the word tasted wrong the moment it left my mouth. "I bought that seat." He laughed under his breath, not cruelly, not loudly, but with the confidence of someone used to being agreed with. "It's empty." "Yes," I said. My voice sounded steadier than I felt, "because I paid for it." He didn't move back. He shifted, settling in, his elbow nudging my side again, this time deliberate, a small claiming motion. The woman dropped into the aisle seat and immediately leaned toward him, their knees touching, their voices lowering into a private bubble that excluded me entirely. I stared at the seatbelt sign, the red icon glowing like an accusation. My palms were damp. I wiped them on my pants, then folded my hands again as if posture alone could protect me. Around us, the plane filled with the sounds of overhead bins slamming, flight attendants calling out row numbers, the soft chaos of bodies finding their places. "Could you please move?" I asked him quietly. "I bought that seat for my comfort." He didn't look at me this time. He shrugged, eyes still on his girlfriend. "I'm with her." "I understand," I said, because I always did, because understanding was safer than insisting. "But I paid extra so I wouldn't be touching anyone." That made him turn. His gaze traveled over me slowly, not openly hostile, just assessing, as if he were calculating how much space I deserved. "Then you should have bought first class," he said. The words landed heavier than they should have. My throat tightened. I could feel the familiar urge rise, the one that told me to endure, to absorb, to make it easier for everyone else. My knee bounced once, then stilled. "I did what the airline recommends," I said. "I bought an extra seat." He leaned back, spreading himself wider. "Doesn't mean anything if it's empty." The woman beside him glanced at me then, her mouth twisting. She said nothing, but her eyes flicked down and away, dismissive, already bored. I pressed the call button. The small chime sounded louder than it should have, slicing through the low hum of the cabin. A few heads turned. I kept my gaze on the tray table, its scratched plastic surface reflecting the harsh overhead light. The flight attendant arrived, her smile professional, practiced. "Is there a problem?" "Yes," I said softly. "I purchased 2 seats. I need this one to remain empty." She looked at the boarding passes, then at him. "Sir, you'll need to return to your assigned seat." His jaw tightened. He stood slowly, making a show of it, his knees bumping mine as he rose. The woman sighed dramatically, rolling her eyes. As he stepped out, she leaned close to him and muttered something I wasn't meant to hear. "Fucking fat bitch." The words slid under my skin, sharp and cold. I didn't look up. I didn't respond. I stared at the empty seat as he left it, as if it might disappear if I didn't watch it closely enough. The flight attendant waited until he was gone, then nodded once at me, efficient, kind, already moving on. The couple's voices resumed somewhere behind me, hushed but tense. I lowered the armrest myself this time, the click loud in the sudden quiet of my row, and sat back, heart pounding, knowing this flight had only just begun. The plane pushed back from the gate with a low, grinding vibration that traveled up through the floor and into my legs. I kept my hands folded on my lap, fingers interlaced tightly enough to ache, as if holding myself together required constant pressure. The empty seat beside me looked almost luminous under the overhead light, a thin strip of safety I didn't dare relax into. The couple settled a few rows back. I could hear them when the engines paused, their voices slipping through the cabin like smoke, not loud enough to draw attention, loud enough for me. "Unbelievable," the woman said. A short laugh followed, sharp and brittle. "People like that shouldn't fly." I stared straight ahead. The seatbelt sign chimed on. I clicked mine into place and felt the familiar tug of it across my body, a reminder of where I took up space. My knee brushed the armrest. I shifted an inch, then stopped. I wasn't going to fold myself in today. The flight attendant walked past again, checking overhead bins. She glanced at me and offered a small, reassuring smile. It steadied me more than I expected. I nodded back, a silent thank you, and watched her move on, her shoes whispering against the aisle carpet. As the plane began to taxi, the man's voice rose again, just enough. "She called a flight attendant on me," he said, incredulous, as if the injustice of it all were still unfolding. "Like she owns the place." The woman snorted. "Must be nice buying extra seats like that." My chest tightened. I focused on the rhythmic bump of the wheels over the tarmac, counted them like steps. Outside, the runway lights blurred into long white streaks. Inside, the air felt thicker, warmer, pressing against my skin. A man across the aisle leaned forward to adjust his bag under the seat. His elbow jutted into my space, then withdrew. He glanced at me quickly, then away, his expression unreadable. Not kind, not cruel, just curious, as if I were part of the in-flight entertainment. The safety demonstration began. I watched it with exaggerated attention, nodding along to instructions I knew by heart: oxygen masks, life vests, emergency exits, all the ways to survive when something went wrong. None of them covered moments like this. When the plane lifted, my stomach dropped in that familiar, hollow way. The engines roared, my ears popped. I closed my eyes briefly and exhaled, slow and controlled. For a few seconds, there was only the sensation of rising, the pull of gravity easing its grip. Then the voice came again, closer this time. The man had leaned into the aisle, speaking to someone across from him. "I mean, if you need 2 seats, maybe don't sit in economy." Someone laughed softly. Another voice murmured agreement. I opened my eyes. The overhead light above my row cast a stark glow, bleaching color from everything it touched. I reached up and turned it off. The sudden dimness felt like relief, a thin shadow to hide in. A woman in the row ahead twisted in her seat, craning her neck to look back. Our eyes met. She held my gaze for a moment, then turned forward again without a word. The back of her head felt louder than any insult. The drink cart rattled its way down the aisle. Cups clinked, ice shifted. The flight attendant stopped at my row. "Would you like something to drink?" "Yes," I said, my voice steady. "Water, please." She handed me a plastic cup, cool and slick with condensation. As I took it, my hand trembled slightly. I wrapped both hands around it, grounding myself in the cold. Behind me, the woman's voice dropped to a whisper that still carried. "She's probably offended by everything." The water sloshed as I lifted the cup. I took a careful sip, then another, the coolness easing the tightness in my throat. I set it down on the tray table and folded my hands again. A child a few rows up began to cry, sharp and sudden. The sound cut through the cabin, raw and unfiltered. The mother murmured soothingly, rocking the seat. No one complained. No one rolled their eyes. The contrast stung. As we leveled off, the captain's voice crackled over the intercom, welcoming us aboard, announcing smooth skies ahead, a promise. I almost laughed at it. The man stood up abruptly, pushing past knees and armrests, heading toward the restroom. As he passed my row, he paused, just long enough to look down at the empty seat beside me. His mouth curved into something that might have been a smile. "Enjoy your space," he said softly. I didn't respond. I watched him move on, his shoulders relaxed, satisfied. My pulse thudded in my ears. The woman stayed seated, scrolling through her phone. Her screen glowed bright in the dim cabin, reflecting off her face. She glanced at me once, then deliberately turned her body away, angling herself toward the window as if I were no longer worth acknowledging. Minutes stretched. The cabin settled into its cruising rhythm. Pages turned. Headphones slipped on. The initial tension dulled into something heavier, a constant pressure that sat behind my ribs. I shifted in my seat, adjusting the armrest again, reclaiming the small pocket of air beside me. My thigh brushed the fabric of the empty seat. It felt almost defiant. A man further back cleared his throat loudly. "Some people are just too sensitive," he said to no one in particular. I stared at the seat back in front of me, its safety card tucked neatly in place. My reflection stared back faintly from the glossy surface, distorted and pale. The flight attendant passed once more, pausing near my row as if to check something on her tablet. She didn't say anything, but she stood there a beat longer than necessary. It felt intentional, protective. I inhaled slowly, then exhaled, feeling something shift inside me. Not relief, not peace, but a tightening resolve. This wasn't over. Not here, not yet. And as the cabin lights dimmed further and the murmurs behind me continued, I realized this flight was only the beginning of being watched. I learned early how to take up as little space as possible, not just physically, emotionally, financially. In rooms where my presence felt like an inconvenience, I learned to fold myself inward, to soften my voice, to apologize before anyone asked. That instinct didn't come from nowhere. It was shaped slowly, year after year, by the way survival works when you're taught that comfort is something other people earn. I grew up in a narrow duplex on the edge of town, the kind where winter crept in through the seams no matter how many towels you shoved under the doors. The heat rattled more than it warmed. At night, I'd lie awake listening to it click on and off, counting the seconds between sounds like it was a game I could win if I paid enough attention. My mother used to say, "Still is safer than loud." Though she'd whisper it while balancing the checkbook at the kitchen table, her pen scratching numbers that never quite worked out. Money was always measured in quiet decisions. Shoes lasted until the soles peeled. Coats were bought a size too big so they could stretch another year. Hunger wasn't dramatic. It was dull, predictable, a low ache you learned to ignore. When there was extra food, my mother pushed it toward me and smiled like she'd already eaten. I knew better. I always did. By the time I was a teenager, my body had already begun to change in ways that drew attention I didn't want. I filled out faster than other girls. My hips widened. My chest grew heavy. Teachers commented on my posture. Boys snickered. Girls whispered. I learned to keep my arms crossed, to hunch slightly, to wear loose sweaters even in spring. At my first job, a grocery store down the road, I was grateful for the uniform. Everyone wore the same thing. No one could accuse me of trying too hard or not enough. I stood on my feet for hours, scanning items, listening to the steady beep of the register. That sound became a kind of anchor, predictable, honest. If you worked, it responded. I married young, not impulsively, but hopefully. He was kind at first, or at least attentive. He liked that I cooked, that I remembered things, that I didn't ask for much. When we pooled our finances, I made spreadsheets. I tracked every dollar. There was comfort in knowing where things went, even when there wasn't enough. We never had children. That was a quiet grief, one that didn't ask permission to settle in. I learned to channel that energy elsewhere, into work, into caregiving, into being the reliable one. When my parents aged, I became the one who drove them to appointments, who filled pill organizers, who slept on the couch during hospital stays. My body grew softer, rounder, shaped by long hours of sitting and waiting and eating whatever was closest. After the divorce, which arrived without drama but left a long echo, I moved into a smaller place. I kept the ledger notebook I'd always used, blue cover, corners frayed. It followed me from apartment to apartment, a record of survival written in numbers, rent, utilities, groceries, the quiet reassurance of balance, even when it was barely there. Flying had never been comfortable for me, but it became worse as I got older. The seats felt narrower every year, or maybe I felt wider. I noticed the way people glanced sideways, the way armrests became battlegrounds of inches. Once a woman asked for a seat change without looking at me directly. Another time, a man sighed loudly every time my elbow brushed his sleeve. I learned to arrive early, to claim the window so I could lean away, to brace myself for the duration. Buying 2 seats wasn't an indulgence, it was a calculation. I saved for it. I justified it the same way I justified good shoes or a decent mattress. This was about being able to breathe, about not spending hours in a state of apology. The first time I did it, I felt almost giddy with relief. I lifted the armrest and settled in, my body finally allowed to rest where it naturally fell. No tension, no constant self-monitoring, just space. It felt like permission I'd waited decades for. That's why the moment on the plane cut so deep. It wasn't just about the seat. It was about the assumption that my comfort was negotiable, that something I had carefully planned and paid for could be overridden by someone else's preference. As the plane droned on, I found my mind drifting backward despite myself. To my mother's hands, always busy. To the ledger notebook, its pages filled with neat columns. To the idea that if you did everything right, you'd earn the right to exist without friction. I pressed my fingers together until my knuckles whitened, grounding myself in the present. The hum of the engines was constant now, almost soothing. The cabin lights were dimmed, casting everything in a bluish haze that flattened faces and softened edges. People settled into movies and naps, retreating into their own worlds. But I stayed alert, too alert. Every laugh behind me felt pointed. Every shift of fabric sounded louder than it should. When the man behind me cleared his throat again, I flinched, my shoulders tightening before I could stop them. I reached into my bag and pulled out the blue notebook without thinking. I hadn't opened it in years, not really, it was mostly digital now. But there it was, heavier than I remembered, solid. I ran my thumb along the worn edge, the texture familiar, grounding. This was proof of planning, of foresight, of care. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. Just holding it was enough to remind me that I hadn't imagined my way into this seat. I hadn't stumbled here by accident. A flight attendant passed by, pausing briefly as she noticed the notebook. Her eyes flicked to it, then back to me. She smiled, small and genuine. "Long flight," she said quietly. "Yes," I replied, "but manageable." She nodded and moved on. The woman behind me laughed suddenly, a sharp burst that made me jump. "I can't believe some people," she said, loud enough now that it wasn't subtle anymore. I closed my eyes for a moment, the hum of the plane filling my head. I thought of all the times I'd stayed silent, all the times I'd absorbed discomfort because it seemed easier than insisting. The pattern stretched back farther than I liked to admit. When I opened my eyes again, the cabin felt smaller, tighter. The space I'd bought was still there, but it felt fragile, as if it could be taken away again at any moment. I slid the notebook back into my bag carefully, like returning something precious to safekeeping. My hand lingered there, fingers brushing the zipper, as if bracing for what might come next. Because even as the plane cruised steadily forward, even as the world outside shrank into clouds and distance, I had the unmistakable sense that this wasn't just about a seat. It was about whether I was allowed to defend myself at all. The descent didn't announce itself. It crept in sideways, disguised as normal. The cabin grew quieter as the flight stretched on, but the silence wasn't peaceful. It was the kind that magnified every sound that broke it. A cough, a laugh, the crinkle of a snack wrapper. Each noise landed with weight, reminding me I was still exposed, still visible. The woman behind me leaned forward abruptly, her tray table clacking down. The sharp sound made my shoulders jerk. She didn't apologize. She didn't even pause. Her knee pressed into the back of my seat as she shifted, testing the space like someone testing a bruise. I stared straight ahead, my jaw tightening. The screen on the seat back flickered to life, an advertisement looping silently. Bright colors, smiling faces. I turned it off. Minutes passed. Then more. My neck stiffened from holding myself so rigid. I shifted slightly, careful not to encroach on the space beside me. The empty seat felt like a fragile boundary now, one wrong move away from being challenged again. The man's voice drifted forward. "Seriously," he said, louder than before. "It's like some people think the world owes them accommodations." No one told him to lower his voice. No one contradicted him. A woman across the aisle chuckled softly. "Right?" I felt heat crawl up my neck. My fingers curled against my palm, nails biting into skin. I forced them open. The flight attendant returned with the drink cart. As she stopped at my row, the woman behind me sighed theatrically. "Finally," she muttered. The attendant poured my refill without comment. When she handed me the cup, our fingers brushed. She hesitated, just a fraction too long. Her eyes met mine. Something unspoken passed between us. Recognition, maybe. Or resignation. Behind me, silence settled again. It stretched, thickened. I could feel it like pressure in my ears, like the moment before a storm breaks. Then the woman spoke, her voice low and pointed. "Must be nice," she said, "being able to buy your way out of discomfort." I didn't turn around. My breath caught halfway in, my chest tightening painfully. I focused on the cup in my hands, the condensation dampening my fingers. "I worked for it," I said quietly, surprised at the sound of my own voice breaking the silence. There was a pause. Too long. My heart pounded. She laughed. "Sure you did." The words were casual, dismissive. They slid into me like something sharp wrapped in cotton. I swallowed hard. My throat burned. The urge to explain surged. My job, my savings, the careful planning, but I bit it back. I had learned long ago that explanations only invited more scrutiny. The man added, "Some people just love playing the victim." My vision blurred for a moment. I blinked it clear, focusing on the aisle, on the steady movement of the cart rolling away. The overhead light above my row buzzed faintly, casting a cold glow that made my skin look pale and slick. I reached up and turned it off again. Darkness pooled around me, thin but welcome. Another stretch of silence followed. It wasn't empty. It was crowded with things unsaid. My chest felt tight, my breaths shallow. I pressed my feet flat against the floor, grounding myself in the vibration of the plane. A few rows ahead, someone reclined their seat abruptly. The sudden movement jolted me. My knee banged against the armrest. Pain flared sharp and bright. I hissed softly, biting my lip. No one noticed. Or if they did, they didn't react. I rubbed my knee slowly, the ache spreading. My hands trembled now, just enough to be noticeable. I clasped them together, fingers interlocking until the shaking eased. The woman behind me cleared her throat. "Unreal," she said, "calling a flight attendant over something like that." I felt something inside me fold inward, a familiar collapse. The old instinct rose, heavy and insistent. Stay quiet, don't draw attention, let it pass. But it didn't pass. When the meal trays came out, the attendant paused at my row. "Chicken or pasta?" she asked. "Chicken," I replied. She placed the tray on the empty seat beside me, hesitating. "I'll move it if you—" "It's fine," I said quickly, the reflexive politeness kicking in. "I can take it." As I reached for the tray, the man's voice cut in. "Wow," he said, "using the seat as a table now, too." A few people laughed, not loudly, enough. The attendant stiffened. She didn't look at him. She didn't look at me either. She just nodded once and moved on, her jaw set. My hand shook as I lifted the tray onto my lap. The plastic rattled softly. I could feel eyes on me, feel the weight of judgment pressing down. The overhead light from the aisle spilled across my hands, making them look clumsy, oversized. I forced myself to eat slowly, methodically. Each bite felt like a performance. Don't spill, don't fumble, don't give them more to comment on. The woman behind me whispered something. I caught fragments. Ridiculous. So entitled. I stopped chewing. The food tasted like cardboard. I set the fork down carefully. Silence followed again, a heavy one. It wrapped around my chest, squeezing tighter with each breath. My ears rang faintly. For a moment, I thought I might stand up, might flee down the aisle just to escape the pressure. I didn't. Instead, I sat there, my body locked in place, my mind retreating somewhere far quieter. My mother's voice surfaced unbidden. Still is safer than loud. The plane hit a patch of turbulence. The cabin shuddered. A few gasps rose, then faded. My stomach lurched. I gripped the armrests, knuckles whitening. The man behind me laughed. "Even the plane's uncomfortable," he said. Something cracked then. Not loudly. Internally. A thin fracture spreading outward. I turned my head slightly, just enough to catch his reflection in the window. His expression was relaxed, amused. The woman beside him smirked, her eyes flicking away when she noticed me looking. I turned back forward. My hands trembled again, more noticeably this time. I pressed them flat against my thighs, feeling the fabric beneath my palms, anchoring myself. Another silence fell. This one stretched longer than was comfortable. I could feel my breath stutter, the urge to cry rising sharp and unexpected. My eyes burned. I blinked rapidly, forcing it down. The seatbelt sign chimed off. People shifted, stood, stretched. The woman behind me kicked her bag forward, bumping my seat again, harder this time. "I'm sorry," I said automatically, the words slipping out before I could stop it. She didn't respond. The silence that followed was suffocating. My chest tightened painfully. For a moment, I couldn't draw a full breath. Panic fluttered low in my throat. I reached into my bag with shaking hands, fingers brushing the blue notebook. The familiar texture steadied me slightly. I didn't pull it out this time. I just held it there, hidden, a private reminder that I wasn't imagining things. The man stood again, stretching his arms overhead, blocking the aisle briefly. "People are so sensitive these days," he said loudly, as if delivering a verdict. No one contradicted him. The cabin felt smaller now, the walls pressing in. The light above flickered once more, then steadied, harsh and exposed. I lowered my gaze, focusing on the scuffed floor, on the small details that didn't look back. My hands trembled openly now. I curled them into fists, nails digging into skin. A single tear slipped free before I could stop it, sliding down my cheek. I wiped it away quickly, embarrassed by the evidence. I sat there folded inward, absorbing each small cruelty, each dismissive glance, each deliberate silence, until the weight of it all pressed so heavily on my chest that I wasn't sure how much longer I could endure without breaking. And that was when the pilot's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing a delay that would keep us trapped together even longer. The announcement settled over the cabin like dust. A delay, weather ahead, we'd be circling longer than expected. A collective groan rippled through the rows. Seatbelts clicked. Someone cursed softly. The woman behind me exhaled hard, a sound meant to travel. I closed my eyes for a moment. Not to escape, but to steady. My chest still felt tight, my breaths shallow. But something inside me had shifted. The weight that had been pressing inward stopped compressing and began to sharpen instead, like pressure turning into focus. When I opened my eyes, the empty seat beside me was still there, unoccupied, untouched, proof. The man behind me leaned forward again. "Great," he said. "More time with this situation." I didn't react. I didn't shrink. I didn't apologize. My fingers loosened from their fists slowly. I flexed them once, twice. The tremor eased. The flight attendant walked briskly down the aisle, her expression strained now, professionalism stretched thin by the announcement. As she passed my row, the woman behind me spoke up, louder than before. "Can you do something about this?" she asked, gesturing vaguely in my direction. "It's uncomfortable." The attendant stopped. Time seemed to pause with her. Conversations nearby quieted, curiosity sharpening the air. I felt the familiar urge surge, to disappear, to make it easier, but it stalled halfway up my spine. The attendant turned, looking first at the woman, then at the man, then at me. Her gaze lingered on me a fraction longer than before. "Ma'am," she said to the woman, her tone even, "what exactly is the issue?" The woman hesitated, clearly not expecting the question to be directed back at her. "Well," she said, waving a hand, "this whole thing, the seat situation, it's just awkward." "It's been handled," the attendant replied calmly. "The passenger purchased the extra seat." The man scoffed. "That doesn't mean she gets special treatment." Something clicked into place then. Not anger, not humiliation, clarity. I heard my own voice before I fully registered the decision to speak. "It means I followed the rules," I said, steady, audible. "And I'm allowed to sit here without being harassed." The word hung there, harassed, plain and unadorned. A silence fell, a real one this time, the kind that exposed things rather than hiding them. The attendant nodded once. "That's correct," she said, "and if there are further comments, I'll need to document them." The woman's mouth tightened. She leaned back abruptly, folding her arms. The man muttered something under his breath, but he didn't argue. The attendant met my eyes briefly. There was no smile now, just acknowledgement. She moved on. My heart was pounding, but it wasn't the panicked flutter from before. It was heavy, grounded. I could feel it in my throat, my wrists, my temples. A man across the aisle caught my eye and looked away quickly, embarrassed. Another woman nodded almost imperceptibly, then returned to her screen. Small things, but they registered. The delay stretched on. The cabin resumed its low hum, but the tone had changed. The couple behind me fell quiet, their whispers reduced to occasional murmurs. The absence of their voices felt louder than the insults had. I reached into my bag and pulled out the blue notebook again. This time I opened it. Blank pages greeted me. I hadn't written in it in years, but the lines were still there, faint guides waiting for purpose. I rested it on the empty seat, my hand splayed across the cover, claiming the space without apology. My breath slowed, deepened. The man stood up again a few minutes later, but this time he didn't say anything. He squeezed past without comment, avoiding eye contact. The woman stayed seated, rigid, her knee no longer pressing forward. As turbulence jostled us lightly, I kept one hand on the notebook, the other on the armrest. The plane rocked. My body moved with it, not against it. For the first time since boarding, I felt present rather than defensive. A strange calm settled in, not relief, not peace, but resolve. I thought of all the moments I had swallowed words to keep things smooth, all the times I had mistaken endurance for virtue. The pattern was suddenly visible, stark as ink on paper. The captain's voice came on again, updating us. Another 10 minutes, maybe more. 10 minutes longer than I'd planned to sit in this truth. I glanced back once, deliberately. The couple avoided my gaze. Their power had evaporated the moment it was named. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt awake. The realization settled quietly, unmistakable. This wasn't about a seat anymore, and it never had been. And as the plane continued its slow circle in the sky, I understood I was done absorbing what I had the right to refuse. When the plane finally landed, the tension didn't evaporate with the thud of wheels on asphalt. It stayed lodged in my shoulders as people stood, stretched, reached for bags. The seatbelt sign chimed off and the aisle filled with the slow choreography of impatience. I stayed seated longer than necessary, not out of fear, out of intention. The couple behind me gathered their things quickly. The man avoided looking in my direction entirely. The woman brushed past my row without a word, her shoulder angled away as if I were contagious. I watched them disappear into the stream of bodies moving forward, their urgency suddenly fragile, hurried. Only after they were gone did I stand. My legs felt stiff, but steady. I reached up, pulled my bag from the overhead bin, and slung it over my shoulder. The blue notebook was heavier now, not in weight, but in meaning. I pressed it flat against my side as I stepped into the aisle. The flight attendant who had spoken up earlier stood near the front, helping an older man retrieve his suitcase. When she finished, her eyes met mine. She hesitated, then said quietly, "If you need a report number, it's on your boarding pass receipt." I nodded. "Thank you." She gave a small, firm smile. "You handled yourself well." I didn't respond. Praise wasn't what I needed. What I needed was clarity. In the terminal, the air felt brighter, louder. Screens flashed arrival times. Shoes squeaked against polished floors. People laughed, complained, checked phones. Life resumed at its usual volume, indifferent to what had just cracked open inside me. I found a bench near a window overlooking the tarmac and sat down. Planes rolled past slowly, massive and deliberate. I set my bag beside me and took out my phone. I pulled up the airline app first. There it was, my receipt. 2 seats, same row, same time. I took screenshots, careful to include the confirmation number, the date, the charge. I saved them to a folder and backed them up to my email. Methodical, calm. Next, I opened my notes app and typed while the details were still sharp. Time of boarding, seat numbers, what was said, who said it, the attendant's response, the delay announcement. I didn't embellish. I didn't soften. I wrote it the way I would have balanced a checkbook years ago. Clean lines, no emotion allowed to distort the numbers. A woman sat down beside me, her rolling bag bumping my ankle lightly. "Sorry," she said. "It's okay," I replied automatically, then stopped myself. "Just, thank you for saying that." She smiled, distracted, already absorbed in her phone. Still, the exchange grounded me. I thought about whether to file a complaint. The old instinct urged me to let it go, to be grateful it hadn't escalated further. But another voice, quieter but firmer, countered it. Documentation wasn't revenge, it was record. I navigated to the airline's feedback form. The cursor blinked expectantly. I didn't start typing yet. Instead, I opened the blue notebook on my lap. The first page was blank. I smoothed it with my palm, the paper cool and faintly textured. For decades, this notebook had been about subtraction, how to make less stretch farther, how to reduce needs to fit circumstances. Now it felt like a ledger for something else. I wrote the date at the top, then the flight number, then a simple sentence. I purchased 2 seats to travel without causing discomfort to others or myself. Seeing it in ink steadied me. I copied the same information into the online form, attaching the screenshots. I described the comments without quoting them verbatim, careful to be factual. I mentioned the attendant's intervention. I asked, plainly, what protections existed for passengers who followed policy and were still subjected to harassment. I didn't hit send immediately. I sat there, watching a plane taxi into its gate, the jet bridge extending to meet it. Connection required movement from both sides. I inhaled slowly, then tapped submit. A confirmation message appeared, reference number generated. I saved it. My phone buzzed almost immediately, an email acknowledgement, automated but real. I leaned back on the bench, the window cool against my shoulder. The adrenaline that had carried me this far began to ebb, leaving behind a quieter fatigue. Not the collapse from before, but the kind that comes after sustained focus. I texted my sister. We weren't especially close, but she knew my history, the patterns I'd carried longer than I should have. Landed. Something happened on the flight, I wrote. I handled it, filed a report. The typing bubble appeared, disappeared, then reappeared. "Are you okay?" she asked. "Yes," I replied after a pause. "Not shaken, just Clear. She sent back a heart. No questions. It was enough. I closed my phone and slipped it into my bag. Around me, travelers dispersed toward exits and baggage claim. The conference I'd flown in for waited somewhere beyond the terminal, its schedule printed neatly in my folder. I stood, adjusted the strap of my bag, and started walking. Each step felt deliberate. The echo of my shoes on the floor matched my pace. I wasn't rushing. I wasn't hesitating. At baggage claim, I stood a few feet back from the carousel, giving myself room. My suitcase appeared, scuffed and familiar. I pulled it free and rolled it toward the exit. As I waited for my ride, my phone buzzed again. A new email notification. This one wasn't automated. The subject line included the word incident. I stared at it for a moment, my thumb hovering, aware that whatever was inside would shape what came next. The email wasn't long. It didn't need to be. Thank you for bringing this to our attention. We would like to speak with you in person regarding the incident on Flight 284. A time, a room number, a name. I stood just outside the conference center, the automatic doors sliding open and closed behind me with a soft mechanical sigh. People streamed past wearing lanyards, coffee cups in hand, voices buoyant with anticipation. The world was moving forward at its normal pace, while something inside me slowed, sharpened. I replied yes. The meeting was scheduled for that afternoon. I spent the morning attending sessions I barely registered. I sat in padded chairs, nodded at speakers, took notes that trailed off into nothing. The blue notebook stayed in my bag, its weight a quiet reassurance against my hip. Every so often my mind replayed the man's voice, the woman's laugh, the attendant's measured tone, not with heat, with precision. At noon, I ate alone in the cafeteria, choosing a table near a window. Sunlight spilled across the floor in wide rectangles, warm and indifferent. I chewed slowly, tasting very little. My hands were steady now. That felt important. At 2:45, I walked down a carpeted hallway toward conference room C. The air smelled faintly of lemon cleaner. My shoes sank slightly with each step, muting the sound. I paused outside the door, adjusted my bag on my shoulder, and knocked. A woman opened it. She wore a navy blazer and a badge clipped neatly at her waist. "You must be Ms. Hart," she said, extending her hand. I shook it. Her grip was firm, respectful. Inside, two other people waited. One was a man in his 50s, silver hair combed back, glasses perched low on his nose. The other was the flight attendant from my row. She looked different off the plane, less rushed, more solid. "Thank you for coming," the man said, gesturing to a chair. "I'm Daniel Rhodes, Customer Relations." I sat, setting my bag at my feet. The chair was comfortable, supportive. I noticed these things. "We've reviewed your submission," he continued, "and we'd like to hear in your own words what happened." I took a breath. Just one. "I purchased 2 seats," I said, "because the airline policy recommends it for passengers who need additional space. I boarded early, occupied 1 seat, and left the other empty as intended. A male passenger chose to sit in the second seat despite being assigned elsewhere." I didn't look at them as I spoke. I looked at the table. Its surface was smooth, unblemished, reflecting the overhead light evenly. When I asked him to move, he refused. After the flight attendant intervened, both he and his companion made repeated comments about my body and my presence. These comments continued for the duration of the flight. The flight attendant nodded once, small but unmistakable. Daniel scribbled notes. "Did you feel unsafe?" I considered the question. "I felt targeted," I said, "and trapped. There was nowhere else to go." He set his pen down. "We take that seriously." The flight attendant spoke then. "I documented the interaction," she said, "including the language used after the seat issue was resolved." Daniel looked up sharply. "You did?" "Yes," she replied. It wasn't subtle. I felt something shift in the room, a slight recalibration. Daniel cleared his throat. "We also pulled seating data and cabin audio from the delay period." My gaze lifted to him for the first time. He met it calmly. There were multiple complaints logged from nearby passengers regarding disruptive behavior. Not about me, about them. The words settled into the space between us, quiet and heavy. "We've identified the passengers," he continued. "They are frequent flyers, corporate accounts." The flight attendant's mouth tightened almost imperceptibly. Daniel slid a folder across the table toward me. "This is a summary of our findings. You're welcome to review it." I opened the folder. Inside were printed screenshots, seat assignments, timestamps, notes, my receipt, my screenshots, corroborated, validated. "We've already taken action," he said. "Their accounts have been flagged pending review. There will be consequences." I closed the folder slowly. "I didn't come here for punishment," I said. "I came because I needed it on record that following the rules didn't protect me." Daniel nodded. "And it will, going forward." The flight attendant met my eyes then. "For what it's worth," she said quietly, "I wish more people spoke up the way you did." I held her gaze. "I wish I had sooner." The meeting ended without ceremony, handshakes, thank yous. The door closed behind me with a soft click that felt final. In the hallway, my phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. I stopped walking. "I heard you complained. Hope it was worth it." My stomach dropped, cold and sharp. I stared at the screen, my reflection faint in the glass. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, then stilled. Another message followed. "People like you ruin everything." I didn't reply. I took a screenshot. Then another message arrived, this one longer, angrier, unraveling into accusations that grew less coherent with each line. I exhaled slowly. I walked back into conference room C without knocking. Daniel looked up, surprised. "I just received these," I said, handing him my phone. He read the messages. His jaw tightened. "That answers one question," he said. He turned to the flight attendant. "We need to escalate this." She nodded, already reaching for her tablet. Daniel looked back at me. "Would you be willing to stay a few more minutes?" "Yes," I said. My voice didn't waver. He typed quickly. The room filled with the quiet clicking of keys. The overhead light hummed softly, steady and bright. "This," he said finally, turning the screen toward me, "is now a harassment case." The words hung in the air, not accusation, classification. I felt my pulse slow, deepen. The room seemed to expand, as if someone had opened a window I hadn't known was closed. Daniel stood. "We'll handle communication from here. You won't need to engage further." I nodded. As I left the building later, the afternoon sun had softened into gold. Shadows stretched long across the pavement. I walked toward the hotel, my bag light on my shoulder, the blue notebook pressed against my side. My phone buzzed once more, an email, airline letterhead. "After review, we have permanently revoked the privileges of the passengers involved." I stopped mid-step. Around me, the city moved on. Cars passed. Someone laughed. A door slammed. I stood there, the message glowing on my screen, understanding fully for the first time that silence had never protected me, but my voice just had. The next morning, I woke before my alarm. Sunlight slipped through the hotel curtains in a pale, careful way, not demanding anything of me. It spread across the carpet, softening the sharp lines of the room. For once, I didn't lie still rehearsing the day ahead. I sat up, rested my feet on the floor, and let myself breathe without bracing. My phone was quiet, no new messages, no notifications tugging at my attention. The silence felt earned. I showered slowly, the warm water loosening muscles I hadn't realized were still clenched. Steam fogged the mirror, blurring my reflection into something gentler. When I wiped it clear, I looked the same as I always had. But the way I met my own eyes was different, steadier, less apologetic. Downstairs, the hotel lobby hummed with low morning activity. Cups clinked, a coffee machine hissed. People spoke in voices that hadn't yet sharpened into urgency. I poured myself a cup and chose a seat near the window, setting my bag at my feet. The blue notebook rested inside it, exactly where I'd placed it the night before. I thought about the plane, the cabin, the way my body had felt folded inward for so long. I didn't replay the insults anymore. They had lost their grip, reduced to facts on a page, addressed and answered. What lingered instead was the moment I'd spoken clearly, without shrinking, and felt the room adjust around me. After breakfast, I attended the final conference session. I took notes this time, real ones, asked a question, a small thing, but my voice carried evenly across the room, and no one flinched when I used it. When it ended, a woman approached me, middle-aged like me. She smiled hesitantly. "I overheard something yesterday," she said, "about the flight. I just wanted to say, I'm glad you said something." "Thank you," I replied. The words felt complete on their own. They didn't ask for anything else. Later, I packed my suitcase carefully, folded clothes, checked drawers. I paused before zipping it closed, my hand resting on the handle. For years, packing had always included a quiet inventory of how much discomfort I was willing to absorb. This time, the list felt shorter. At checkout, the clerk asked how my stay had been. "Good," I said, and it was. Outside, the air was crisp, the sky open and bright. My ride pulled up and I slid into the back seat, watching the city recede through the window. Buildings passed, crosswalks flashed by. People lived their lives, unaware of the small boundary that had been drawn and held. On the return flight, I boarded early again. Same routine, same policy. 2 seats. The armrest lifted. The space beside me empty and respected without question. No one commented. No one stared longer than a second. The flight attendant checked my pass, smiled, and moved on. I settled in, opened my bag, and took out the blue notebook. For the first time in years, I turned to a fresh page and wrote something that wasn't about numbers or restraint. I wrote about space, about permission, about the cost of silence versus the cost of speaking, and how only one of them had ever given me room to breathe. As the plane lifted, sunlight poured through the window, warm and forgiving. I leaned back, my body finally allowed to rest without calculation. The notebook stayed open on my lap, its pages no longer a record of what I'd had to give up, but a reminder of what I was no longer willing to surrender. If my story touched you, it's probably because you've held yourself smaller than you needed to for a long time, too. That old ledger we carry, of favors owed, space borrowed, silence endured, doesn't have to define the rest of our lives. If you want to share what you've been quietly carrying, I'm here to listen.